Welcome. Welcome. Welcome to Vanadium. I'm Chris Rankin. The more I learn about this mad world, the more mysterious it seems. Ether Dome sounds like an underground solvent huffing competition, or some weird futuristic sci-fi floating sports arena. It's actually a museum today, but the Ether Dome was a surgical operating theater at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. It served as the hospital's main operating room from its opening in 1821 until 1867, but also as a kind of entertainment attraction for physicians and scholars to observe the early development of surgery. It was the site of the first public demonstration of the use of inhaled ether as a surgical anesthetic on October 16, 1846, otherwise known as Ether Day. I don't understand why October 16th isn't a national holiday. Medicine, especially surgery, would never be the same after this milestone, and would even have implications for philosophy and physics more than 100 years later. Anesthetics would become a tool for studying the difference between life and death. The most famous anesthetic, ether, may have been synthesized as early as the 8th century, but it took 1,000 years for its anesthetic importance to be properly appreciated, even though the 16th century physician and polymath, Paracelsus, noted that chickens made to breathe ether not only fell asleep, but also felt no pain. After Ether Day, as anesthesia became more common, some stories started to spread about some strange experiences of those who had been under. Many of the patients in the Ether Dome weren't reporting just blackness during loss of consciousness. People were talking, even skeptical physicians and scientists. Losing consciousness frequently wasn't leading to blackout. Instead, to mystical states some consider to be akin to the near-death experience. Losing consciousness seemed to be leading to enhanced consciousness for some. Anesthetics had been known to other cultures, but before this, the knowledge never really rooted in the modern West. The first attempts at general anesthesia were probably through herbal concoctions administered in prehistory. Alcohol is one of the oldest known sedatives, and it was used as far back as thousands of years ago in ancient Mesopotamia. It's reported the Sumerians cultivated and harvested opium as early as 3400 BC. The ancient Egyptians even developed a few surgical instruments, as well as basic sedatives, including possibly an extract prepared from the famous mandrake plant. In 300 BC, in China, Bian Kui was a legendary Chinese surgeon who reportedly used general anesthesia for his procedures. His anesthetic included extracts from plants in the deadly nightshade, or solanum family, containing the potent tropane alkaloids. These are the same chemicals found in jimson weed, and in low amounts even in tobacco and potatoes. On November 14, 1804, Hanaoka Sesshu, a Japanese doctor, became the first person to successfully perform surgery using general anesthesia in Japan. Hanaoka relied on traditional Japanese and Chinese medicine. It took years of research and experimentation, but he finally came up with a magic formula, which he named Susansan, which combined Korean morning glory, which is based on a tropane alkaloid contained in the deadly nightshade family, and a few other herbs. These were supposed to act synergistically. At around the same time, English scientist Joseph Priestley discovered the gas and dentist office staple, nitrous oxide. Initially, scientists thought this gas was terribly lethal, even in small doses, like a lot of other nitrogen oxides. However, in 1799, British chemist Humphrey Davy decided to find out for sure by experimenting on who better but himself. That's the spirit, Humphrey Davy. To his astonishment and relief, he discovered nitrous oxide was not deadly and simply made him laugh, so he nicknamed it laughing gas. It all makes sense. This guy saw the potential for this stuff in anesthesia. In 1800, Davy wrote about the potential anesthetic properties of nitrous oxide in relieving pain during surgery. But of course, the Puritans at the time were probably frightened by the idea of laughter, and no one pursued the matter any further. However, people did start to partially anesthetize themselves for fun, and more importantly, for insight. One of the leaders of the pack, William James, who's an American philosopher. William James was to nitrous oxide what Snoop Dogg is to blunts. William James even anesthetized himself on stage just to show the audience how great it was. Even back then, he wasn't the only one. Other nitrous aficionados include Sir Winston Churchill, English politician. He apparently liked inhaling it between sips of tea. I made that part up. But he did reportedly see value in the insights gained from partial loss of consciousness. Samuel Colt, the inventor of the Colt 45 revolver. Who could be more red-blooded American than good old Sam Colt? And he loved him some laughing gas. Now, I feel like I've diverted from the subject of the podcast, so now back to Ether Day at the Ether Dome, October 16th, 1846. The big event. William Morton, a local dentist, used ether to anesthetize surgical patient Edward Abbott. John Collins Warren, the first dean of Harvard Medical School, then painlessly removed part of a tumor from Abbott's neck. After Warren had finished and Abbott regained consciousness, Warren asked the patient how he felt. Reportedly, Abbott said, "Feels like my neck's been scratched." Warren then turned to his medical audience and uttered, "Gentlemen, this is no humbug." I guess that meant it worked. The crowd in the Ether Dome cheered, and this show was just the beginning. The Ether Dome became a place where doctors got together to observe the spectacle of anesthesia, all that blood and surgery, without the moaning and screaming patients. Surgeons, doctors, scientists, and even some curious members of the public couldn't get enough of the ether show. I could definitely see how this would be more entertaining than a lot of the stage drama at the time. All the intelligentsia just had to pay a visit to the Ether Dome for a show. There was almost a box office list of surgeries, and probably people taking bets as to whether the anesthetic would actually work and the patient would rear up in agony at the beginning of the procedure. There were those who thought the whole thing was a hoax, that the surgeons were somehow using body doubles, and there was no way the surgeries were actually being performed on living patients. They thought anesthesia was fake news. Within a few years, though, the use of anesthesia became common, and this brings us to the connection with the hardest problem in physics and pretty much all of philosophy and thought. The problem of consciousness, the mind-body problem. How can one's consciousness study itself? There are really two problems to solve: the easy problem and the hard problem. The easy problem is to break down how sensory systems work, how the data is processed in the brain, how that data drives behavior. The hard problem is why are those processes accompanied by subjective experience? The philosopher Thomas Nagel proposed in his 1974 paper, "What is it like to be a bat?" that experiences are essentially subjective, accessible only to the individual undergoing them, felt only by the one feeling them, while physical states are essentially objective, meaning they're accessible to multiple individuals. Maybe the only way to solve the hard problem, the mind-body problem, is to separate the mind and the body. Scientists like Bruce Grayson at the University of Virginia are already thinking about this. This is from his paper, Implications of Near-Death Experiences for a Post-Materialist Psychology. He writes, "In our collection at the University of Virginia, 22% of our NDE cases, near-death experience cases, occurred under anesthesia, and they include the same features as other NDEs, such as out-of-body experiences that involve watching medical personnel working on their body in unusually bright or vivid light, meeting deceased persons, and significantly, thoughts, memories, and sensations that were as clear or clearer than usual." Researchers recently carried out a massive study intended specifically to identify reliable EEG correlates of loss and recovery of consciousness during surgical anesthesia. Their results confirm the standard thinking about anesthesia and EEG, namely that unconsciousness is associated with a pronounced shift toward lower frequencies in the delta and low theta range, with a more frontal distribution and higher power. More significantly, it shows that the gamma-type EEG rhythms lost power and became decoupled across the brain when patients lost consciousness, and that these changes were reversed with the return of consciousness. The pattern reflects the complete disabling of the brain under anesthesia. Additional results supportive of this conclusion derive from other functional imaging studies that have looked at blood flow, glucose metabolism, or other indicators of cerebral activity under general anesthesia. In these studies, brain areas essential to the global workspace are consistently deactivated individually and decoupled functionally. Auditory and other stimuli are no longer able to ignite the large-scale cooperative network interactions that normally accompany conscious experience. These experiments are getting us closer to an understanding of the biochemistry in the brain. What is making the mind turn on when you wake up? There are a few theories out there, including the idea that there are structures in neurons called microtubules that may be acting in some quantum mechanically magic way. These quantum effects typically only happen to very cold things near absolute zero, so there's a great deal of controversy over how this could be happening inside the human body. There's a case report from the journal Pediatric Anesthesia from 2006 called Near-Death Experience in a Boy Undergoing Uneventful Elective Surgery Under General Anesthesia. It was written by Ursula Lopez, MD, from the Division of Anesthesiology at the University Hospital in Geneva, Switzerland. She writes, within the context of a prospective study that was designed to evaluate the incidence of awareness with intraoperative recall in children undergoing general anesthesia, a 15-year-old French-speaking boy was interviewed after general anesthesia for elective orthopedic limb surgery. He reported on a state of awareness during that anesthetic. In fact, he remembered hearing music, which was confirmed by the surgeon in the room, and the voice of the doctor, seeing 3 big lamps above him and having tactile sensations. He felt as if someone was moving him on the operating table and putting him on his left side. His position was changed after induction of anesthesia to a left lateral position. He also felt an injection on his hip, probably the puncture to the L4-L5 intervertebral space. General anesthesia was maintained with a continuous intravenous infusion of propofol. A psychologist who was involved in our study interviewed the boy using a hierarchically semi-structured questionnaire. The interview was recorded, transcribed, and then analyzed. In order not to influence the answers of the patient, the interview began with general, open-ended questions. Subsequently, specific questions were used to obtain more detailed information. We report on some extracts of this interview. I was sleeping, and suddenly I felt awake, and I had the impression that I was leaving my body through my head. I could see from above my whole body, lying on the back on the operating table and surrounded by many doctors. I felt as being above my physical body, and I was lying face down. I was like a spirit without my arms and legs, and I was floating under the ceiling of the room. Initially, while being detached from my real body, which was lying on the operating table, I felt a little bit scared and weird. But then, I had a sensation of lightness, and I felt relaxed and comfortable. I had the impression that everything was real. I distinguished the operating room and the surgeons. I then saw a dark tunnel in front of me, and I felt attracted to it. I passed through the tunnel very fast, and at its end I saw a bright light that didn't hurt my eyes. As I was passing through the tunnel, I heard noises which sounded like when you were watching TV without a program. Then these noises became voices. Suddenly, I felt again attracted to my body, which was still lying on the operating table, in which I went again through my head. At this time point, the experience was over, and I was asleep. The boy indicated that when he woke up from anesthesia, he felt disappointed as he did not have enough time to see what was going on at the end of the tunnel. This is a doctor's account of an out-of-body experience occurring to him under anesthesia. It was written by Dr. Rajiv Party. I was in the operating theater. I managed to tell the anesthetist what I did for a living and ask him what he was about to give me. Propofol and fentanyl, he said. In other words, the usual, exactly what I would have selected. Are you ready? Asked the surgeon. He waved his gloved hand at the anesthetist, and I was asleep before I could answer. Was it over? Was the surgery already over? I felt myself zooming straight up, as if in a lift. It was the same feeling you get in the pit of your stomach when you're rocketing to the 20th floor of a skyscraper. Slowly, my consciousness began to return. I could see the ceiling approaching, its glossy surface slowly getting closer. Then I looked down and saw my own abdomen, now with several incisions. I heard the anesthetist make an off-color joke. I won't repeat it, but everyone in the operating theater laughed, including me. But where was I? For a few moments I froze with fright, worried that whatever was holding me up on the ceiling would suddenly let me drop. Eventually, though, I relaxed, watching in rapt amazement as the surgeons and nurses worked on my body. Is that really me? Or is this really me, I wondered. How can I be in both places at once? Suddenly, I became aware of a shift in my perspective as my field of vision expanded. I was still in the operating theater, but at the same time I could see my mother and sister sitting on a sofa in our family home, thousands of miles away in New Delhi, where I'd grown up. The scene was vivid and detailed. My sister was wearing blue jeans and a red sweater, and my mother a green sari and green sweater. "What should we make for dinner?" my sister asked. "It's cold outside," said my mother. "We should make hot soup. Lentils sounds good." I was so focused on them that the sudden sound of instruments clanking on the operating table gave me a start. Turning my head to the left, I found I could still see and hear the scene below me. "This guy's a mess. He's lucky to be here. Give me more swabs," said the surgeon to the nurse. I was now seriously frightened. What was going on? Would my untethered consciousness ever get back into my body? Or was I destined to roam through eternity as a spirit? Was I dead? I felt like an astronaut who'd left his spacesuit, only to find that a suit was unnecessary to begin with. With rising panic, I looked back and forth at the two scenes, until both started to fade like a fast-setting sun. Everything went dark. I was relieved. I'm returning to my body, I thought. Then came a jolt of pure fear. To my right, I heard screams of pain and anguish. I was drawn in, as if on a moving pavement, to the edge of a flaming canyon. Smoke filled my nostrils, and with it the sickening odor of burning flesh. I knew then that I was on the lip of hell. I tried to turn away, but each time I took a step back, an unseen force moved me forward. A voice spoke to me telepathically. "You have led a materialistic and selfish life," it said. I knew that was true, and I felt ashamed. Over the years, I had lost empathy for my patients. Standing on the rim of hell, I remembered a woman who'd come to my clinic for treatment of chronic arthritis. She was in considerable pain, but that wasn't the reason why she was weeping. "I need to talk to you, doctor," she said to me. "My husband's dying of lung cancer, and I don't know what to do." "I'd love to talk to you," I said, writing out a prescription for painkillers and sleeping pills, "but I have several patients waiting." I was like a robot. I trained myself to blunt my emotions. Worse, I had trained myself to think only of myself. As the smoke billowed and the burning souls screamed around me, I thought of my possessions and how meaningless they were. Why did I have all these things? Why did I need a home so big that when we were in different parts of the house, we had to communicate through our phones? I felt steeped in shame, but I knew my chance to change was gone. At any moment now, I'd be pulled into the pit of fire to burn for eternity. There seemed to be no way out, but I prayed for one anyway. My God, give me another chance. Please give me another chance. Almost at that instant, I did get my second chance, in the form of the last person I ever expected to see. It was my father. I recognized him immediately, though he looked at least 30 years younger than when he died. He took my hand in his and led me from the edge of hell, as if I were still a little boy. Then, putting his arm around me, my father tried to comfort me, and it was the first time I could remember him touching me so affectionately. To be honest, I almost shrank back. Even at the age of 53, I was still afraid that my father was going to beat me, just as he had so many times in my childhood. But just then, I had a vivid flashback of the day he found out I'd bunked off school and gave me a savage beating with a cricket bat. Suddenly I was seeing it all from his perspective. His own dreams of bettering himself had come to nothing, so he beat me because he couldn't bear to see me wasting my own life. What I discovered in my father's mind wasn't hatred, but fear. He'd been frightened that I wouldn't take advantage of my chances and go on to university. His tyranny, I finally understood, had been born of love. And now this, my father, my cruel and despotic father, was spiritually rescuing me from hell. I looked into his eyes, and my heart melted with love. No words came from his mouth, but for the first time I learned from him that his own father had abused him just as he'd abused me. Anger, my father told me, isn't usually about an event. It's passed on from father to son. If you know that, you can stop it. You can choose not to be angry. Simple love is the most important thing in the universe. I asked myself, would I ever return to the land of the living? If I did, I would have to focus on love. I would have to break the cycle of anger in my family. The scenery was changing. I noticed now that we'd walk straight into a tunnel. Incredibly, it was soon teeming with people I knew were my ancestors, reaching out hands of welcome. I recognized my grandfather, who gave me a look of sheer joy. Love is the most important thing there is, he told me. Then both he and my father simply faded away. I was now halfway through the tunnel, and that's when I had a life review, in which I re-experienced in detail all the good things that ever happened to me in my childhood. From being given sweets by my sisters, to the warm feeling of being swathed in my mother's love. Again, a telepathic message came from nowhere. The simple moments in life are the most important. All moments are memory and lessons. They all build the person you are. I was nearing the end of the tunnel now, where a light shone more brightly than 1,000 suns. I could feel it pulling me weightlessly toward it, but I felt no fear. Before I could reach the light, however, two angelic forms emerged into the tunnel. Exuding powerful energy as they hovered above me, they introduced themselves as my guardians, the archangels Michael and Raphael. Now, I'm a Hindu, so it was only later that I learned that Saint Raphael is the angel of healers, and Saint Michael is the protector of people and the angel who opens doors. Both archangels had a human shape, yet they shimmered with light and had a thick translucence. Michael had a blue hue and long hair. Raphael was greenish and wore a cap. In a moment, I was lifted by them and guided toward the blazing light before us. As we approached, I found myself high above a green meadow, peppered with those rose bushes. Just the smell of the grass and roses made me delirious with pleasure. We traveled onto a higher plane, and then a higher one still, until I was surrounded by a landscape of clear light. Raphael explained that at the highest level, you are surrounded by a powerful energy that consists of pure love and intelligence, the underlying fabric of everything in the universe. Enlightenment comes, added Michael, when a person realizes that love is everywhere, and it's the only thing that matters. Yet, most people don't realize this until they leave the earth. With that, they took me by the arms, and we moved rapidly upward toward the being of light, a silver blue form that showed no signs of being male or female. When it engulfed me with its blue light, I felt as if I were being wrapped up in a blanket of pure love. I am one with the universe, I thought. The being started communicating telepathically. You need to take a look at your life one more time, it said. It's important to reflect on changes that you need to make. It went on to tell me that I was destined to become a healer of souls, helping people with problems such as addiction, depression, and chronic pain. I would no longer work as an anesthetist. Instead, I'd become a practitioner of spiritual medicine, of consciousness-based healing. I don't know how long I stayed with the being, but my exit when it happened was sudden and rapid as I fell into a white fog. For the first time, my eyes began to hurt, so I closed them. And when I opened them, I was in the recovery room. My heart was beating hard, and my lungs pumped double time. How do you feel? It was the anesthetist. still in his scrubs. That was a rough one, he said, referring to my surgery. I must have looked stunned, because when I didn't respond, the anesthetist leaned over closer. Are you all right? He asked. I saw you during my surgery, I said. I left my body and watched you from the ceiling. Interesting, he said, his voice in a study of disinterest. No, really, I watched you as you administered the anesthetic, and I even heard you tell a joke. I repeated his risque joke word for word, and he blushed. I must not have given you enough anesthesia, he said, looking hard at my file in order to avoid meeting my gaze. I wasn't about to be blown off. As one professional to another, I was determined to tell him exactly what I'd seen. So I described going to India where I'd seen my mother and sister and traveling to the edge of hell. I just started on the next part when he glanced at his watch and flipped the file shut. Very interesting, he said. I'll come back later to talk about it. I never saw him again. When the surgeon came back to check in on me, I started recounting my out-of-body experience all over again, and this time got all the way to the tunnel entrance. At that point, he reached for his phone, which wasn't even ringing. Then he excused himself by saying he had an important call. After recovering, Dr. Party resigned from his job as chief anesthesiologist at Bakersfield Heart Hospital in California, much to the bewilderment of his colleagues. He got rid of all his expensive cars, sold his mansion, and moved into a house half the size. The experience really changed him. Thank you very much. This was Chris Rankin with Vanadium.